As a filmmaker, I've always been committed to social causes, whether it's poverty, whether it's race relations, whether it's equality. And I figured if I was going to make the sacrifices that I inevitably had to make to be a filmmaker, that I was going to do it on my terms. Well, I've been really blessed over the years to get some of the world's best talent to narrate my films, including James Earl Jones, Dame Judi Dench, and for Letters from Generation RX, Academy Award winner Tilda Swinton narrated. I think what appealed to these actors is the humanity in the script and the tragedy. When you interview families who have lost a loved one and you put that on paper in a meaningful way surrounded by science and data and statistics, they were moved. And I believe that that's why they decided to narrate. When I produced Generation RX, I really wanted to focus solely on children. Clearly what Generation RX reflected was that we had created an entire new generation of kids who were being prescribed psychotropics, 734% increase in ADHD drugs, a whole generation of children being placed on antipsychotics, and then of course antidepressants. So we had this out of control train that was running through the best of an entire young generation. They knew that the science was corrupt behind psychiatric drugs, but they all turned their heads away. And so I felt personally the need to fight against that, to at least give people the information to make an informed decision. After Generation RX was released, I literally received 2,000 plus emails, letters, phone calls from parents, from teachers, from teenagers who said, "Oh my God, you told my story," or "I thought I was alone. Thank you for helping me understand that it was the drugs that were responsible for my behavior." It was so powerful receiving all these letters that I determined that I had to create another film. So naturally, I titled that Letters from Generation RX. These families have been changed in ways that are imperceptible to us. Unless you've gone through a tragedy like this, there is no way that you can identify with the horror of their lives. To lose a loved one, to lose a son, to commit suicide in front of your children, and to know that a drug is attributable to that. It's not acceptable to me and any filmmaker, any artist who cares about truth, and that's why we do this work. Anyone that cares about truth has to tell it. You don't have a choice. And this was the motivation behind me producing Letters from Generation RX, really, was to tell human stories, to tell real human stories. Because if we don't understand the pharmacologic nature of antidepressants and why they might force someone to become violent or to take their life, or, at least we have the chance of seeing ourselves through the eyes of our neighbors. And that's what I really believe that I achieved with Letters. As a matter of fact, the film opens with a scene of a young mother driving an old Ford Bronco. She has her children in the back, her young children. She drove them at full speed into a river in an attempt to take not only her life, but her children. This was a loving mother driving that Bronco. The antidepressant got her in such dark places, she wanted to take her life and that of her children. And that's how the film begins.
Perhaps we should take nothing for granted. Not our loves, nor our lives. 1 minute all is well. The next, we're plunged into darkness, unable to process what is real and what is madness. Autumn Stringham realized this all too young.
It was the summer after I turned 8.
She should not be alive, and she knows it.
That was the moment that shattered trust. How do you trust anybody after that?
Autumn's mum did eventually die by suicide, alone on a country road. Tony Stephan was now widowed with 8 children at home.
I'm laying in bed at night in my room, listening to a house full of mourning, and it just shattered the whole family. It just shattered the children, it shattered me.
It has become so commonplace, these irrational acts and horrific deeds, that we've almost become numb to it. We've seen them in schools and public spaces, in homes and churches. They're all over the news. Try as we might to understand them, we can't. Try as we might to ignore them, they call to us still.
We called paramedics, and they tried feverishly to revive her.
Andy Downing's world has just been shattered. His daughter, a victim of an unimaginable act of violence. But it was how this 11-year-old girl died that truly horrified the world. Candice hanged herself. The Downings didn't realize it at the time, of course, but her case was not a rare event. No, Candice was far from alone.
She started on this drug somewhere around January, and these things make you unafraid. They make you do things you wouldn't do normally. They make you able to put a rope around your neck and hang yourself.
The coroner in Ontario resisted every request by the Carlins to get the truth about the death of their daughter, but the Carlins were willing to risk everything to get it.
We basically mortgaged our home to the hilt to try and get some answers. But to me, it was worth it to have that doctor up on the stand, and our lawyer asked him, "Did you tell Sarah that Paxil might cause her to want to kill herself?" And he said, "No, I didn't." "Well, why didn't you tell her that?" "Well, because," he said, "she wouldn't have taken it." "Did you tell her parents?" "No." "Did you tell anybody?" "No."
The drugs responsible, they say, are called SSRIs, and they're among the best-selling drugs in the world.
It was a sample pack of Paxil.
Supralex, sertraline, which is Zoloft, the maximum dose of Zoloft legally allowed.
There was one thing in her system, in the coroner's report, a therapeutic dose of fluoxetine hydrochloride.
Psychiatric drugs like SSRIs have been defended with religious zeal by their believers and damned by others as some of the most dangerous drugs on the planet. Distinguishing truth from fiction has been a challenge, and this has placed the public in the unenviable position of deconstructing the scientific and medical dogma on their own in the midst of a 30-year social experiment. As director of the National Institutes of Mental Health, Thomas Insel has been at the center of a storm of contradictions about the use of these drugs.
Fundamentally, why have we failed here? Why has the suicide rate not come down? All the numbers are going in the wrong direction. So where have we failed? What's gone wrong here?
The answers, according to Insel, run contrary to the standard arguments put forth by mental health professionals.
A lot of people will say it's because of stigma and access. The fact is that actually more people are getting more treatment than ever before, so it's hard for me to quite believe that. They don't, in any sense, provide a cure.
This change of heart contradicts what we've been told about psychiatric drugs for a generation now, and raises serious questions about how and why these drugs have been dispensed so indiscriminately to millions.
Gosh, I've got a list of like 20 different medications I was on by the time I was about 11. We just had bags and bags full of pills and in massive doses that I shouldn't have been, no child should have been prescribed.
It got to the point where they prescribed Haldol, and that's when I really got more concerned than ever.
My mom and my sisters basically found me in the game room sitting on the floor, like completely zoned out. And I just remember this feeling of, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die.
And if she falls, there will be no one there to catch her. When she falls, there will be no one there to catch her. And and if she...
Melissa ended up in the emergency room and she had a very serious psychotic reaction.
I was like, oh, this is it. I've completely gone crazy. This is insane. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I'm doing anymore.
I called my pediatrician, and he was there in 10 minutes, and he said to the nurse, "Get her off that shit." That's what he said.
It was a very, very low point. Often the case that I would contemplate suicide just because I didn't know who I was anymore, and all of these side effects that I was experiencing were so scary.
You don't give a 9-year-old kid Haldol.
The lesson of a generation's worth of psychiatric experiments is that regulators didn't protect the public, doctors didn't protect their patients, journalists refused to ask the tough questions. The pharmaceutical companies played the system and profited handsomely, and millions suffered, died, became addicts, or were otherwise harmed. These are the stories of those who have fallen, and of those who have somehow survived. Many lost sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, and their tragedies forced these private people out of the shadows. They wanted answers, and were not interested in the politics of medicine. If the truth had been afforded us decades ago, millions would have been spared similar fates.
These are vital issues that speak to our morality as a nation, as a people. How can you turn your back on this? About the fate of children and adults that are dying on these drugs? The film was produced because the stories of these families and the millions of other people they represent needed to be told. These parents all gave me the worst events of their lives and trusted me to tell their stories. I felt a tremendous responsibility to those families who had entrusted so much to me, and I was determined to not let them down. For me, it's a full buy-in situation. I care about the truth. I care about the truth about drug companies. I care about the truth about FDA. But most of all, I care about the truth of these mothers and fathers and families who lost loved ones needlessly. And at the end of the day, I'm very happy and proud to have stood with them.